Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's early Wednesday morning, so hopefully anybody who had a question was able to get it in. These are a little earlier than I would normally record them, but let's jump in and see what we got. First up, over on Floatplane, Dumez wants to know if they could leave their SNES on for many days in a row without harming the console. They want to play games that have no password or save feature, but time is tight, so they can't just sit there for hours, and they want to be able to just hit pause and come back in a day or so and then continue. And in the context of this question, let's assume that there's no power issues. We don't have any power outages or power spikes or anything like that. And if that's the case, my guess is that it's fine as long as you don't let it overheat. Now, my guess does come from 20 years of working in the computer hardware industry, including designing and manufacturing computers. So my guess is a little more of an educated guess than any random YouTuber, but I also just never really did an analysis of a Super Nintendo console for that. But generally speaking, when it comes to chips, having them hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold is worse than just leaving them hot all the time. Hot meaning within range, within the operating temperature range, but, not off and like that. So I would think that it's fine. And I do think, though, that from the example you said, if you leave your PC on all year round and never even turn it off, the difference is your PC has a finite lifespan in your workload. So yes, of course, retro PCs are awesome, and I'm into that stuff too. But relying on your PC for work, most people at least every 10 years or more would get a new one. Whereas when you're looking to classic consoles or any kind of classic electronics, preservation always has to be in the back of your head. So if you said like your analog Super NT, I would say leave that sucker on 24/7 if you needed to, because that's a brand new piece of equipment, first of all. But it's something that's not your original classic console. And I'm not putting, I shouldn't have used analog as an example because there's always drama with that company. But, I don't think there's going to be nostalgia for that. I think the analog products are filling a gap between the original consoles and other types of emulation. So I would be more okay doing it with that, just knowing that if that ever dies on me, I'm not ruining an old classic piece of hardware that's important to me. But that's an opinion. As far as the fact goes, I'm pretty sure the fact is, as long as you don't let it overheat, there's normal airflow in there, then I don't think that would be a problem at all. And just understand that as these capacitors continue to get used and heated up, if you haven't done a cap replacement yet, I would do so before you start doing that, just in case. But assuming you've already done the normal refurbishing and maybe even add another 7805 voltage regulator to it just to replace that, I don't think you would have any issues. So if anybody has any other info, as always, please chime in the comments, because I don't have a problem if I'm wrong. I would always like to be corrected as long as I actually am wrong. Very often people tell me I'm without a doubt wrong, but they didn't actually do any of the research. And I have all the proof that shows that, actually, no, this is how it works. But that's not the case this time. This is an educated guess. So I'm pretty sure you should be fine. Probably it's a good idea to just do some preventative maintenance on it before you do that. But if anybody else has an opinion, feel free to share. Now moving over to Patreon, SL72 wanted to chime in on the conversation of getting an original Intellevision controller working on the Mister, or any other kind of way to get an Intellevision-like controller. And they said the adapter that's currently available at retronicdesign.com does work with Intellevision 2 controllers or the Intellevision flashback controllers on the Mister. So that's awesome. I'll leave a link in the description for anybody that was interested. And does anybody out there have any lag test results, or can anybody else confirm what other controllers they work with? They're a 9-pin D-sub connector, so they have the potential to work with quite a lot of others, but that has to be programmed into the logic for that. So if anybody else has that, I would love to hear your experience with it, just out of curiosity. And also, SL72, I totally got what you meant, so thank you very much for describing the website. But just to be clear, if you're supporting on Patreon, Floatplane, or Ko-fi, you could just drop links in the comments. Those don't get deleted. But if you're just commenting on the standard YouTube video or even the YouTube support service, YouTube is the one that gets rid of comments, not the other services. So sorry about that, but thanks for chiming in. Next up, Esben Hardenberg said they're getting a bit of OLED envy and wanted to ask my opinion on which of the LG TVs would be best to get secondhand. They're currently looking at all the way back to the CX, but do I think there's much to gain if you go for the C2 and up? Their main usage will be the RetroTink 4K with Mister using BFI and 120 Hz with the CRT filters and everything, as well as PS2, Dreamcast, and Wii U. So I do have an opinion on this, but OLED experts, please chime in and correct me if I'm wrong. My opinion is while I bought a used TV, I bought the floor model that was on basically 24/7 at a Best Buy, and I've had no problems with it. I would feel better getting a newer one. So I would try to get something that, if I was on a budget, I would try to get last year's model on clearance somewhere, which you could often find for almost half price. In fact, the one that I bought was half price because not only was it last year's model, it had been on 24/7 in a Best Buy for basically all of 2016 when I picked it up in late 2016. So, that's something that I would always go to first. And also remember that while the newer ones do have some issues, especially with things like 4x3 and BFI, if you're using a Tink 4K, none of that really matters because it could handle it for you. The downside is if you use the Tink's BFI at 120 Hertz, then you could only output up to 1080p. So your CRT filters won't be as detailed, but they're still going to look great. However, if you do end up getting a used one, I think the CX was generally known as the one that everybody's been loving, that had really good BFI built in. So you would be able to use your Tink 4K into 4K 60 mode and let the CX set it to 120 with BFI. But that's got to be up to you. If you could find a really good deal on a used one, great. But how many hours does that have on? Because mine had every day, it was on every day for like, let's just say 6 months, and it ended up being totally fine for me. But a CX, what if somebody had it on basically every single day for 4 years? Then you might really be lowering the lifespan of that TV. So if you get it cheap, cool, whatever. But, I wouldn't spend a lot of money on something like that. I don't know if you're able to easily access the hour count. You might be able to go into a service menu or something just to see. But if you know it's one of those scenarios where somebody bought it and they use it twice a week, 3 times a week, whatever, it's basically brand new anyway. So I'll leave that up to you. But I'd also like to know anybody's opinions in the comments. Has anybody else bought used OLEDs and had issues? Because did I just get lucky on mine? Or I don't have any burn-in or any problems whatsoever, although it could definitely use a recalibration. But that's any high-end TV. You'd want to do that every couple of years. I mean, this is, 8 years old now or something like that. So for me at least, but yeah, I mean, that's my recommendation is either if you're on a budget, get whatever leftover last year's model you could find, or, go back to the CX or anything. But I think newer might be better if possible. Next up, Quantum Guitar bought that mini oscilloscope that I've been talking about for almost 2 years now, and they bought it with the intent of using it to accomplish some of the test point waveform-based calibrations on their PVM 1953 MD, and it's definitely a gateway oscilloscope. They were able to hack what they think were some reasonable corrections, but they do think the 2.5 megahertz sampling compared to a more professional 100 megahertz is holding it back a bit as far as dealing with color burst info and things. That being said, for $30, they think it was able to improve things, which is awesome. Now, they haven't used an oscilloscope since college, but they'd like to think it's something that's within their wheelhouse. They think the main improvement they saw was from using it to adjust the G2 screen voltage, but they don't really think they'd recommend it for this purpose. It seems like a real oscilloscope would be likely much better and easier to use for this specific purpose. Have I had any experience with these kind of test points in a PVM, or do I have any thoughts relative to the sampling speeds impact on its usefulness? So I read your whole question out loud because you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. This $30 device, in my opinion, for retro gamers is supposed to be, is sync going to kill my SCART equipment? Is audio going to kill my SCART equipment? And let me get an idea of what the RGB voltage is like at an all-white screen or 100% color bars to be able to gauge if there's something else wrong with it. while there's other things that you could use it for, the moment you step into things like calibrating a CD laser or calibrating your PVM, or if you're a developer making a product, definitely don't rely on a $30 scope. Get yourself one of the Rigels that I always talk about. And almost everybody I know has the same one that I talked about in that video with Steve a while back. So my opinion for you is if you're starting to use it for real measurements, some serious stuff, just invest in the good one because it's a couple of $100, but it'll probably last you a lifetime, and it does a lot. And the advantage of a lot of people in the retro scene using that one is that if you need help, it'll be pretty easy just to say, hey, does anybody ever try this? And you're almost surely going to be talking to somebody with a similar scope to yours. So that would be my recommendation. But yeah, I still think that $30 is a good investment because now you have a little battery powered scope that could fit in your pocket. And if you ever need to test an arcade board or just quickly test something without firing up your full rig, there you go. You still have a neat thing. And even if you decide you never want to use it again, sell it for 15. Take a short little loss, but then somebody else on a budget could get themselves a neat little scope too. So yeah, you nailed it. I don't think that's something that test points on a PVM. I think you should be using a good scope for, as well as anything that you would deem important or a little too complicated, like CD lasers once again. So, still glad you got it because I think it's probably exactly like you said, your gateway scope to lead you to the real ones. So I'll leave a link to the scope page on the website, links to the scopes we use and all the different videos that I've worked with smart people to get the info out to you. Next up, Pippin said they know the EasyCoo splitters have 1080p downscaling for capture, but how much lag would be there if you leave it on by accident? And I can't remember exactly when I tested, but I'm pretty sure, 99% sure I tested this last year and it was zero latency with the downscaling, which at first you might think, how could a cheap device do this at zero latency? But it kind of makes sense because in order to have latency added, you need some kind of frame buffer in there to get the signal in, manipulate it, and then spit it out. And that would cost more than these splitters cost in almost all cases. But also, all the splitter is doing is deleting half the information. So it's not doing something crazy complicated. And if they've already had this done on a chip, then just including that functionality in it, and then that should just be a toggle, which it is. It's the dip switches on the side. So please, anybody out there who has a real measuring tool to be able to show this, double check me if you can, but I'm 99% sure last year I hooked up a Tink 4K and did this, and there was zero latency added. So I don't know. Let me know if anybody else has any info on this, but I would say 99% sure I'm remembering this correctly, and nothing would really happen from a lag point of view. You would just have half the detail that you would have if you ran it in straight 4K mode. Well, that's it for this week. Looks like it was another shorter one, which works out because things are still a bit crazy, but I think mid-November, things should be back to normal. I hope. Maybe I'm being a little too optimistic here, but I think everything should be back by then. So next week, if there's another short one, I might just skip it because a lot of people have said over the years that they prefer the longer ones. They prefer just leave it on in their car or during a commute or while they're walking to work or something. So if it's another short one next week, I might just skip it, but as I always say, these are as long as they need to be. Sometimes there's 4 questions and it's 40 minutes long. Other times there's 20 questions and it's a half hour. I just try to give each answer the time that I feel like I want to spend on it. So, as always, though, thanks for everybody who participates in these. And if you have any question whatsoever, ask wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post. So even if I skip a week, don't worry. Just whatever is the newest Q&A post on any of the services, just ask your question there and I will get to it whenever I do these again. So thank you so much for your support. I really, really appreciate it. And I will hopefully see you next week, but if not, definitely the week after.